Hi there. Welcome to One Voice, One Night. Tonight, under the quiet sky and beside a gently glowing fire, I have a story for you. A story that drifts softly between memory and dream. So find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself slow down. If you're ready, let's begin. Tonight, as the stars settle into place, let me tell you about a train most people never see. A train that only runs at night. They say there's a train that only runs when the world is quiet. You won't find it on a map. It doesn't show up in schedules. And yet, it always arrives exactly when it's meant to. I first heard the whistle when I was about to fall asleep. It came from far away, soft, distant, like a memory calling out, not loud enough to wake the town, but just enough to stir something inside me. It wasn't a dream, because I remember the way my window rattled slightly, the way the air changed, like something unseen had passed through. That night, I stayed in bed, curious, but uncertain, and by morning, the world was back to its usual rhythm. Birds chirping, coffee brewing, dogs barking 2 streets over, but I couldn't forget the sound. The second time I heard it, I got out of bed. There was no clock ticking, no wind blowing, just the night, and that single long whistle. I slipped on my coat, barefoot, didn't even think to grab a phone or shoes. Something about that sound told me, this isn't something you record, this is something you follow. Outside, the streets were empty but not silent. There was a hum in the air, like the night itself was alive, waiting. And then I saw it, a track that hadn't been there before, laid across the quiet field behind my house, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. No station, no signs, just a single wooden bench and a lamp that flickered once and stayed on. The train came slowly, like it didn't want to startle me. The engine was deep blue, almost black, with silver outlines glowing like starlight. It made no smoke, just soft steam that curled up and disappeared into the sky. It stopped right in front of me. The door opened, but no one stepped out. Instead, a small brass sign inside the door glowed with soft lettering. One ticket, one rider, one journey. I looked around, still alone, still night, still that quiet humming in the air. I stepped inside. The door slid shut behind me with a gentle click. And just like that, the train began to move. The train moved quietly. So quietly, in fact, that I wasn't sure it was moving at all. There was no clattering of wheels, no sudden jolt forward, just a slow and steady glide, like we were floating between moments. The window beside me didn't show trees or houses, no towns, no roads, only stars, thousands of them spilling across the sky like glitter on deep velvet. And every now and then, a streak of silver, like the night was sighing in slow motion. Inside the train, the air was warm. Soft golden lights lined the ceiling like little suns tucked away for safekeeping. The seats were empty, except mine. Or at least I thought so. That's when I noticed the first thing. It was sitting across from me. A small stuffed rabbit, with one ear flopped over and a button missing from its chest. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. I reached for it. As soon as my fingers touched the fabric, a whisper echoed inside the cabin. Not out loud, not from a speaker, just inside me. You left me under the bed. I waited for years. I froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. This was mine, my rabbit, from when I was 5. I'd forgotten it completely, until now. I turned slowly, scanning the rest of the cabin, and I saw more. A red notebook bent at the corners, a friendship bracelet with one broken bead, baseball glove, a scarf, a pair of mismatched socks. Each item sat quietly in its own seat, like passengers made of memories, and with each one came a voice. You promised you'd finish this story. I was her favourite colour. You wore me the day it snowed. None of them were angry, just waiting, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be let go. The train wasn't taking me to a place. Not yet. It was taking me back through the things I thought I'd left behind. Not just objects, but pieces of myself I'd outgrown. Or maybe just buried too deep to carry anymore. I sat back quietly, watching the car of forgotten things glow gently in the dim light. The rabbit still sat across from me, its one ear drooping slightly, as if to listen. And I wondered, how many more things had I left behind in the quiet corners of my life? The train continued forward, smooth and slow, and outside the stars never stopped watching. I spent a long time sitting in that cabin, just me, the stuffed rabbit, and all the quiet things I once cared about but forgot. The train moved on, smooth as ever. No announcements, no station names, no time. Eventually I stood up, not because I was restless, but because I felt something calling me forward. I stepped into the next car, expecting to find more memories. Instead, I found nothing, just an empty aisle. Rows of soft blue seats, curtains swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze. And at the far end of the car, a glass door. Behind it, a narrow hallway leading to what looked like the control cabin. I hesitated. Every train needs a conductor, right? Someone has to steer. Someone has to know where we're going. I walked to the door slowly. It slid open without a sound. Inside, no one. No levers, no buttons, no steering wheel. Just a single wooden chair, facing a wide window that looked out into the endless stars. On the wall beside the chair there was a tiny plaque. Simple lettering. No fancy border. It read, "No hands guide this journey, only intention." I stood there silent, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. And yet, the train kept moving, forward, steady, unbothered by my questions. It should have made me uneasy. Instead, I felt calm. There was no driver, no plan I could see, but something deep inside whispered, "It's okay not to know. You're still being carried." Maybe the train didn't need a conductor. Maybe the tracks already knew the way. I turned back and walked slowly down the aisle, my steps soft against the velvet carpet. The air felt warmer now. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the train understood that I'd seen something important. Something I couldn't explain, but would carry with me anyway. I sat back in my seat. The rabbit was gone. In its place, a folded note. I opened it. It read, "You're doing fine. That's all." And it was enough. Outside the window, the stars blinked like soft affirmations. Not shouting, just existing, bright and quiet. The train rolled on. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. I must have drifted for a while. Not asleep, just floating. Like the train had rocked me into a different kind of stillness. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was darker. Not cold, just quieter. More still than before. Like the night had leaned in closer, and I wasn't alone anymore. Someone sat 3 rows ahead. At first I thought I was imagining it. A faint outline, barely visible in the dim light. Thin, wispy, like fog left behind by breath on glass. They didn't move, just sat there. Their body flickered, like smoke trying to remember how to be solid. I stood slowly, walked forward. Each step felt like moving through a memory I wasn't sure was mine. As I reached the seat behind them, they turned slightly. No face, just suggestion, a presence more than a person. And yet, when they spoke, I felt it in my chest. You almost remembered me last Thursday. The voice was soft, warm, and deeply familiar. You were walking home, and the scent of rain on concrete made you stop, just for a second. That was me. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because my throat tightened, like I was holding back a name I'd never said out loud. They continued. I don't stay long, just long enough to remind you that not everything lost is gone. Then they turned forward again, their shoulders relaxed, and slowly their form began to fade. I blinked. They were gone, but the air around me felt full, like they'd left behind a layer of warmth that hadn't been there before. Back in my seat, the folded note was gone too. In its place, a single silver thread, looped loosely like the start of a bracelet. I held it gently between my fingers. It shimmered once in the light, then rested still. Outside, the stars were shifting again. Not faster, not slower, just different. As if the train had turned slightly, and now we were headed somewhere new. And though I still didn't know where that was, I no longer minded. Sometimes the unknown feels like a quiet kind of kindness. The train curved gently, and I felt the shift before I saw it. A soft pull, not of motion, but memory. I rose from my seat again, moving instinctively towards the next car. My hand slid along the rail as I walked, as if even the metal remembered where I was going. The door opened into something different, a cabin with no seats, no windows, just space, dimly lit, with our walls covered in deep blue velvet. The floor was warm beneath my feet, though I wasn't sure what I was walking on. In the centre of the room stood a single microphone, old-fashioned, silver, with a rounded top like the ones in 1940s radio shows. I didn't touch it. Instead, I listened, and the room answered. At first I heard nothing, just the stillness. Then a voice, mine, younger, brighter. I'm going to build a spaceship someday. The words echoed softly, followed by the sound of a small laugh. Not mine, Mom. Her laugh, clear as morning. And then another voice, a whisper I hadn't heard in years. I'm sorry I never called back. It was him, the friend I lost after high school, the one I thought about every time I passed the street where we used to skate. The voices came slowly, not all at once, like stars appearing one by one in the sky. Some I remembered, some I didn't, but all of them were mine, pieces of my life spoken into the world and somehow caught by this train. A joke I told when I was 8, a secret I whispered into a pillow, a goodbye I didn't get to say. They floated through the air as if the walls themselves were breathing in my past and offering it back gently. I stepped closer to the microphone, not to speak, but to listen, and I heard something I didn't expect, a voice I had never heard out loud before. You're allowed to rest now. It was calm, steady, the kind of voice I always wished for when I was too tired to explain how I felt. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the train. Maybe. It didn't matter. The message was clear. This was a place for all the things we say when we think no one is listening, and all the things we needed to hear, but didn't know how to ask for. I stood there until the room fell silent again. Not empty, just full in a different way. Then, without a sound, the door behind me opened. The hallway beckoned. As I turned to leave, the microphone flickered once, then went still, and the last voice I heard whispered softly, Thank you for coming back. Somewhere between the silence and the stars, the train slowed. Not in speed, but in time. I didn't notice at first. But when I stepped into the next car, everything felt softer. Like the world had turned down its volume just enough to let something delicate pass through. This car was lined with windows, tall, curved, polished like mirrors in a dream. But they didn't show the outside, not the stars, not the sky. They showed me, versions of me. At first I saw the obvious ones, the child sitting cross-legged on a classroom floor, mouthing the words to a story because they was too shy to speak out loud. The teenager with sleeves pulled over trembling hands, laughing at jokes that didn't feel funny. The college kid staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to decide whether to stay or run. They weren't moving, they just existed, held in still frames like memories pressed into glass. I moved slowly, walking along the aisle, watching myself grow up again. Some versions I remembered instantly. Others made me pause, because I wasn't sure if they were real or just who I thought I was supposed to be. One window stopped me completely. There I was, older than I am now, hair a little longer, eyes a little calmer, sitting by a lake at dusk, not doing anything at all, just being. And the me in the glass looked up, met my eyes, smiled. Not a big smile, just enough, as if to say, "You'll get here, eventually." I blinked, and the image faded gently back into shadow. I turned to walk away, but something inside tugged at me. I looked back. This time the window showed a version of me I had almost forgotten. One I didn't expect to miss. The version who believed everything was still possible. The one who wrote letters to the future and left them in drawers. The one who cried during movies and danced without music. I pressed my hand to the glass. The reflection did the same. And in that moment, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel shame. I just felt whole, like every version of me had been walking this train together all along, and maybe they had. The lights dimmed gently, a signal it was time to move on. I gave the glass one last glance, not as a goodbye, but as a promise. Then I stepped through the door, leaving behind the windows, but carrying their warmth with me. Outside, the stars had shifted again, and this time I noticed they looked a little like the sparkles in a child's drawing. Messy, uneven, and perfect. The next door opened slower than the rest, not because it was stuck, but because it seemed intentional, like it was giving me one last chance to turn around. I didn't. I stepped through, and immediately I knew this car was different. There were no windows, no lights from above, just soft golden lanterns floating gently near the ceiling, casting circles of warm light across the floor. The air was still, not heavy, just timeless. That's the word that came to mind. Timeless. I looked around for a clock, a schedule, a signal, something to tell me where I was, how long I'd been riding, or when I'd arrive. But there was nothing, just long cushions along the walls, and shelves filled with items I couldn't quite name. Sand in jars, wilted flowers, a candle half burned but never melted further, a teacup that stayed warm no matter how long I held it. I sat down, and the moment I did, the room seemed to breathe with me. Inhale, exhale, no rush, no goal, just this. This is the room where you stop counting. The voice wasn't external, it came from the space itself. Soft, feminine, like being rocked in someone's arms when you were too tired to stand. No clocks live here, no calendars. Just now, just you, just breath. I didn't move, didn't speak, and for once I didn't feel like I needed to. The weight I didn't realise I'd been carrying, the years I thought I lost, the months I wished had gone differently, the minutes I spent worrying, all softened, melted. In this room, no one was late, no one was behind, no one was wasting time, because time didn't rule here, it just stepped aside. And for a little while, so did I. I lay down. The cushion shifted just enough to hold me, as if it had been waiting. Above me, one lantern drifted slowly, its glow flickering like the heartbeat of something ancient and kind. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to be still. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, being still felt like progress. I stayed in that room until my breath synced with the silence, until the thought of what comes next no longer felt urgent. Then, without a sound, the door at the far end opened. The train hadn't stopped, but I had, and when I stood up again, I felt taller somehow, not in body, but in presence. As I stepped through the doorway, I didn't take the past with me. I didn't chase the future ahead of me. I simply walked forward, right on time. The hallway beyond the room with no clocks was darker now. Not cold, not ominous, just deeper, as if the train itself had dipped below the surface of something unseen. There were fewer lights, fewer sounds. Even the gentle hum beneath my feet had quieted, like the train was holding its breath. I walked slowly, and after a few steps I saw it. A door, different from all the others, made of dark wood, with gold lines carved into swirling patterns that shimmered when I moved. No handle, no button, just a sign above it that read, "This door opens only once." I stared at it, not out of fear, but reverence. There was something final about those words, not threatening, just true. I reached out to touch it, but before my fingers could graze the wood, a voice spoke from behind. Software familiar. Not everyone sees that door. I turned. There stood a figure, not smoky like before, not hidden, just gentle. Their face was hard to remember, even while I looked at it, like a dream that slips through your fingers the moment you wake up. You see it because something in you is ready, but the choice is always yours. I looked back at the door. I didn't know what was behind it. Maybe it was the end of the ride. Maybe it was something new. Maybe it was nothing at all. If I open it, I whispered. Do I get to come back? The figure smiled. No one ever really leaves the train. Parts of you stay. Parts of you go. That's always been true. I stood in silence for a while, thinking of the stuffed rabbit, the voices, the stars, the room where time stopped, the version of me that smiled from the window. And then I stepped back, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't done. Not yet. The door didn't protest, didn't vanish. It just waited. That's the thing about this door, the figure said quietly. It opens only once, but it opens when you're ready, truly ready. Not because you're tired, not because you're lost, but because you've arrived. I nodded. There was peace in the waiting. I turned away from the door, walked back down the hallway, and the train welcomed me like I'd never left. Somewhere in the distance a whistle blew, not loud, not urgent, just a reminder. The journey was still mine to take, and the door would still be there when it needed to be. The train slowed, gently, not with brakes or screeches, but like a deep inhale before a whispered thought. I hadn't felt it stop before. Every other moment had passed in movement. even the quiet ones. But this was stillness. I rose from my seat, drawn by something I couldn't name. Outside the nearest window, there was no town, no station, just a platform, old wood, soft light, surrounded by trees that bent slightly inward, as if they were listening. The door to the train opened with a soft chime. No announcement, no one told me to get off, no one told me to stay. I stepped onto the platform. The air smelled like moss, and something familiar I couldn't quite place. Rain on warm stone, maybe. Or the pages of a book that hasn't been opened in years. There was no sign, no map, no schedule. Just a bench, a lamp, and a path that curved out of view. I sat down and immediately felt it. A presence, not a person, not a spirit. Just awareness. As if this place had been expecting me. I didn't ask where I was, because somehow I already knew. This place didn't exist to be named. It existed to be known. And you don't always need to name what you know. I stayed there for a while. Minutes, maybe hours. It didn't matter. Time didn't tick here. It breathed. And with each breath, something inside me settled. Not like falling asleep, but like putting something down that had been too heavy for too long. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. But when I turned, there was only a small sign. One I swear hadn't been there before. Carved simply into wood. Not every stop means you have to leave. Some are just for remembering. I smiled. And with that, I stood. Walked slowly back toward the train, which waited without impatience. Without judgment. Just there. Like it always had been. I stepped inside. The door slid closed, and the train began to move again. Out the window, the platform faded into the trees, but the stillness it gave me stayed, tucked inside somewhere deeper than memory. And I knew, whatever came next, I wouldn't be looking for a destination. I'd be listening for the whistle. I'd be watching for the moment the world slowed just enough to remember what mattered. And I'd know, somewhere out there, there's always a stop waiting to be seen. Even if it's not on any map. The train moved slower now, not in speed, but in spirit. Like even it knew the journey was nearing something important. I stood once more. My steps were no longer hesitant. There was nothing left to rush and nothing to fear. As I passed through the cars I'd seen before, they felt different. Not because they'd changed, but because I had. The room of voices felt quieter, not empty, just at peace. The windows that once showed my younger selves were still glowing faintly, but this time they didn't call to me. They simply watched, gently, proudly. I walked until I reached the final door. It looked like all the others. Simple, soft gold framing. No sign, no sound. I stepped through. The last car was almost empty. One long window wrapped around the side, revealing stars that looked closer than ever, like I could reach out and gather them in my hands. There was one chair, facing the stars, and beside it, a small table with a mug of something warm. Not labelled, but familiar. I sat down, took a sip. It tasted like everything I missed, and everything I didn't know I needed. No voices, no movement, just presence. The hum of the train faded until all I could hear was my own breathing, and it was enough. I didn't need to ask where I was going. I didn't need to know what was next. The questions that once echoed in my chest had quieted, not because I found answers, but because I'd stopped needing them. Sometimes peace isn't in understanding, it's in surrender. And so I sat, not waiting, not wondering, just being. The stars outside twinkled softly. The train glided forward. endlessly, gently, and as my eyes began to close, I whispered into the silence, "I'll ride a little longer," and the night whispered back, "You're already home."